This video is to describe the filing and resources feature within the software. There are several places to store files in the software, and most of those are specific and relatively obvious. For example, the images of a student would be uploaded to the images, the passport information, front and back pages of the passport, or the BRP information, visa information, and so forth. They are already put in specific places, and that makes sense. But there are other situations where there are contractual documents or other resources, such as unaccompanied minors forms and the like, where it is not so obvious where to put those. There are, in most components, so here on the students page, there are options for files. And in here, there is a generic file system. So you can store whatever files you need to keep the records for this particular student. And you need to think a little bit about where you're going to put these, because it is logical to store them in one place and perhaps less organized to store them somewhere else. So just to run through, there are files with students. There are files that you can store with schools. So here, for example, there is a schools file tab here. And you might put information in here, for example, about information that the school has sent you for a particular concert, or information about coronavirus precautions being taken. There are also files with the community. And so, for example, each of these records here can have separate files added to them. And there are also files with the households and homestays. If I expand one of these, you'll see there's a file page here, and there are files that you can store with the households as well. Now, for example, a common file that you might want to store is the contract that you have with parents for a given student. Actually, that seems to be most logically stored with the student. It wouldn't be as easy to find if it was with one of the parents, and you wouldn't want to particularly upload it twice if they had two parents. And so the best place to put that would be on the student files page. Now, when I say files, I actually mean files and links. So this would be an actual file, and this is a specific PDF, but you can also upload links. So if I click here, add, I can add a link. And a link is very similar to a file, except that the data is derived from the internet, from a URL, from an address. And you type the data URL in here, and instead of having the file, it simply links to the website where that file is stored. So that might be on an agency server. There are pros and cons to doing this. If you upload an actual file, of course, and you want to update it, then you have to update it, and potentially in several places, but preferably not. But if you want to upload a link, then that's great, because if you change the data that's at the end of the link, then the file will change. But of course, if that filing system on the website goes out of date, the link becomes invalid, then nothing happens when you try to download it. Okay, so in all of these cases, in files and links, you can type in a name, you can type in some notes, which is some other information that you would want to reference the file. This is the file name if it gets downloaded, and you can have a date, and that can be a logical date of when the contract started, for example, or it can be today's date if you want, or you can leave it blank. Okay, so that's the basic principle of files. We're now going to look into what we call resources. So the resources tab is usually visible for most of the other users of the system, so homestays, parents, and so forth. And you can organize the resources page logically at the system administrator's side to have various categories. So in the preferences, there is a tab called resource categories, and you can say exactly which categories you want. So here we have a category for parents, for students, for homestays, a generic policies category and an unaccompanied minors form category. And if I go to resources, those are mirrored up here at the top of the page, and I can select each of those. However, on the homestays or the parents, when they log in, they don't see this broken down, because obviously if a parent logged in, that it would be daft to have an option written for homestays, and so we simply put those in a long list for the homestays and the parents and so forth. There is always a tab called Other, and if you choose not to organize your files or your resources in any particular way, then there is a tab called Other, where you can put in items that don't logically fit anywhere else. So now we're going to try and share some information. So I'm going to upload a file. I simply click Add and then a File. I'm going to select it from the filing system. I could drag and drop it, and I'm going to upload a British Airways unaccompanied minor form. So I am going to put the file name in here. So this is the British Airways unaccompanied minor form, and for all British Airways flights would be my explanation of it. And the file date I'm going to leave off, because this is a current file, so I'm going to leave that off. And I'm going to save that file, so that file is now available on the system. But of course, at the moment, the only people who can see it are system administrators and admins. And so I'm going to add what we call sharing rules. So the sharing rules are if you expand the record here, the sharing rules appear in a subsection below. So if I add the sharing rules, this is where it gets reasonably involved, and there are several sharing rules that need to be thought about. First of all, the easy ones. If I go to specific users, I can make this file available with a specific user. So if I wanted to particularly make this available to Jacob Ling, I could name him here, and that file will be visible to Jacob Ling. Of course, that's slightly awkward if you want to have several people doing it, and really we probably want this British Airways form to be visible to parents and perhaps agents and so forth. But it does allow you to share a specific file with a particular user. And just to be clear, these sharing rules are the same sharing rules wherever files are. So even if they're in resources, or if they're in students or community or households or schools, you can apply sharing rules, and it is the same set of sharing rules. So you only have to learn how to use one set of sharing rules. Okay, so that would be a rule for a specific user. You can also exclude a particular user. So for example, I could allocate this file, make it available to all students, but I could exclude certain students. And that one is fairly obvious as well. There is a groups feature, so you can add a file to a group of students. So there are a few groups defined in this company, and you can see which groups, and you can define your new groups in the groups tab here as well. So you can say who is included in what group, and you can make up new groups. And so this would be an easy way of including a group. And of course, if I've shared it with a group, but then I want to exclude a few people, I would share it with a specific group. So I could share it with all students. And if I press visible to, I will see who, if I save it, I will see who can see this. So if I press visible to here, you can see this is available to 3 students. If I go back to the sharing rules, if I now exclude one of those students, so let me just pick one of those students, James Patel. So if I add a rule for excluding James Patel from this group, now if I save that, it will only be visible to 2 students because James has been excluded. So that's the kind of thing you're setting up. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of these rules. So there's a groups, there's an excluded, and there is a specifically included rule. So those are the 3 easy rules to understand. The next ones get slightly more complicated. So I'm going to make this visible to a number of students at once, and I'm going to pick the statuses. So I could make it visible to current students. I could also make it visible to students that are prospective as well. So this is an OR functionality. So if I pick current and prospective, it'll show me it'll make this file visible to current students and also prospective students. So it's an or functionality, so either. I could also make it to do only for boarding only for boarding students. So this will now, and the functionality link between the various is exactly the same as you would have on the filters at the top. This is now an and. So it'll now only show this file to students who are current in the status and who have boarding set as their tag, or at least one of their tags is boarding. So if I save that, I now go to visible to. This isn't visible to anybody because presumably there are no current boarding students. Well, let's just make sure that is the case. I go to students here, and here's a left. The student has left and they're boarding. Here's a current. Nope, it doesn't look like there are any current students. So I'm going to pretend that Charlie Yamka hasn't left. I'm going to change his status to current. So he is now a current boarding student. He matches the criteria for that sharing rule. And if I now look at visible to, then I can see Charlie Yamka has appeared. Now, whilst it has appeared, he has appeared in red. And that means that he still can't see the system because he still won't be able to see this file, and he can't see it because he has no permission to read the resources. So let me just go back into the students. The permission system is part of another video, but let me just briefly show how it's done. I'm going to look at his record. I'm going to look at his permissions and see what permissions, and he's set to boarding. I'm going to click here because I have permission to edit permissions, and I'm going to see what the boarding students, and this will take me to the preferences and take me straight to the permissions page. So in the permissions page, there is the boarding student permission. If I just expand that and I'm looking for resources, yes, for some reason, boarding students, and I would want boarding students to be able to see the resource page. There's no reason to prohibit them seeing the resources. So I'm going to include resources there. Do I want them to be able to add additional file resources there? No, I don't. So I'm just going to, it's a read only, it's a view only option. So I'm going to save that. So if I now go back to the resources and look at this file, indeed, Charlie Yamka is now not red. He can actually see that file. So just to prove a point, if I jump to Charlie Yamka's record, it'll take me to the students file. I can now press this I up here and it'll now view the software. The software will now view the system as if it was Charlie, and he should have a resources tab, and he can now see the British Airways unaccompanied minor form, and if he clicked here, it would download it. Okay, he could download that and print it out and what have you. Okay, so I'll go back and we'll look at some of these other options. So I'm going to continue on with my British Airways unaccompanied minor form. I've got it made available to students. I'm going to delete that one for a moment just to keep it less confusing. I'm now going to add an option. So that was the students option. I'm now going to add a community option. So I am going to add it as the community. Now this one is really quite involved. You have the tags and you have the team member roles. So again, on the community, I can make it available to a specific type of tag. The tags for communities are in the preferences and statuses and tags, and the community tags are here as standard. Now, you don't have to use tags on our system. You can use statuses or you can just use team member roles. But if you wanted to, you could say, okay, so this is only going to relatives. So this file is only going to be visible to relatives. And in fact, it's not going to be visible to all relatives. I'm not going to let it visible to the aunts and the uncles. I only really want to make it visible to the mothers and the fathers. Okay, so it's going to be available to mothers and fathers. If I save that and look at the visibility rules, I now see that it is visible to Jibu Wong. She can access the resources tab. I can see that it would be, according to the sharing rules, visible to Jacob Ling, but based on the his particular permissions, he can't see it because his permissions don't let him to. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but if I just check on Jacob Ling to understand why he can see it, he is a relative, which is great. If I go to his students tab, I can see that he is in fact the father of Jenny Ling, and that's why he can see it. Okay, so He is a father, he's on the system, he's the father of Jacob, and therefore he can see that resource. So that would be the sharing rule for community. However, you can also say what the student statuses are. So for example, if I made Jacob Ling, I'm going to clear that filter, I'm going to make Jacob Ling, in fact, I'm going to make Jenny Ling, who is the daughter, he is prospective. So if I look at Jenny Ling's record, in her team is Jacob Ling, who's the father, but this is a prospective student, whereas Charlie Yamka is a current student. So again, if I modify that on here, at the moment, we know that Jacob Ling and Jilu Wong can see this, but I'm actually going to hide, effectively, I'm going to do it only for parents of current students. So this is now a file that will be shared with members of the community who are team members in the status of either father or mother. They have a community tag of relative, and they are fathers or mothers of current students. And I can save that, and now it will only be Jilu Wong who can see it, because she is the mother of a current student. Now I can probably actually delete this relatives tag. Let me just try and delete the relatives tags out of interest. So I'm just relying on the relationships set up in the team members. If I save that and I check to see who's visible, so there are in fact more relatives who have appeared. We see Jen Wimpsham and Jay Wong. So if I just look at Jay Wong on his record, so if I just click here on the magnifying glass, it'll take me to his record. He wasn't set up with a tag. And so, in fact, I want to tag him as a relative. He is the father of David Wang. And so I have now checked him as relative. And if I go to Jem Wincham, I'm not sure why she was there. Let's just have a look. I'm going to clear this filter and look at Jem Wincham here. And she's set as a homestay, but she's set, this must be a mistake, because she is not the father of David Lee. So I've actually got her in the wrong role here. She is the host family of David Lee. So that explains why she was set up. She is a homestay, and she's not the father of David Lee. So that was clearly a mistake there. If I now go back to the resources, Jem Wincham has gone. And it is now visible to Jay Wong. And even if I added the community tag for relative in here again, then Jay Wong would still be able to see it if I went back to visible to, because he is now tagged correctly as a relative. Okay, so that was a rather long-winded way of explaining that one, but we furthermore can filter on student tags. If I go back to students, just to prove a point, if I make Jenny both current and add a tag which is London and save that, then David is current and London, Jenny is current and London, and they both have additional tags. If I go back to resources, I have the tag of London and current, and if I now look at visible to, I see both David's parents and Jenny's parent. And finally, just for complete flexibility on this, you can specify a student's school. So I'm just going to check to make sure that Jenny is not going to the same school as David. So David is set up at Rugby School, and Jenny is set up at King's Hospital. Fine. And so if I now go back to the resources, I am just going to specifically share this form with students from a Rugby School as well. So there are a lot of options, and you will not be using all of them at any given time. But if I now look at visible to, it's only going to show me David's parents again, because Jenny is now excluded because she's not at Rugby School. So a lot of options there. You need to pick the relevant options that work for the scenario that you're trying to set up. Okay, so that was the community option. I'm going to delete that one. And now I'm going to look at students of households. So on the resources page, you can select another sharing option, students of households. Again, you can set up the student statuses, the student tags, and even the student schools. And in this case, I'm not going to bother because we've seen that in the last sequence. So I'm just going to set up households, and I just want to make this visible to John and Pippa Radford. So perhaps rather than an unaccompanied minors form, if John and Pippa Radford had specific rules about where was dangerous to go in their village, that might be a deep pond or something, and they wanted to show you, or indeed if they wanted some documentation that was specific to their household, you could share it here. Perhaps it would have been a better place to put this if we went to the households menu, but let's persist in doing it here. And so if I now look at visible to, it's going to show me David Wang, because if I go to the households page and John and Pippa Radford, I can see that they have David Wang as one of their students, and that is in fact the only student who is allocated to David Wang. So if I look at Pippa Radford's record, for example, here, and on the Students tab, I can see that they are the host family exclusively to David Wang, and so that resource is now available to David Wang because they are the students of this particular household. Let me achieve the same thing by putting that in the resources, in the files for the household. So I'm going to household, I'm going to the files page of that household. There are already host family handbooks. And so if I expand this, I have a sharing rule here. This handbook is available to household members, but I'd also like to make it available to the students of this household, and I have to select which household it is. So if I just quickly look on the Students tab rather than going in as David, I can see that file is now visible to David himself. Okay, so that's basically the rundown of those ones. So that is, if we go back to the Resources tab, we have now seen students, communities, specific users, excluded groups, and students of households. Community of households is even more generic. So this would be where you make a file that is on a household normally, visible to anybody in that community. Who is basically a member, a team member in the same community as that household. So here, for example, if I wanted to make the profile visible to the parents of this particular household, so the parents of children who are staying at this household, the sharing rule would be the community of households. A lot of options here. Again, you can tag on which tags they're seeing, and you can select by team member roles. So I'm just going to make this available to the mother and to the father, and I can pick which student status is. So it's only going to be for current students. Again, I can do tags. I can do specific schools if I want to, and I'm going to pick Pippa and John Radford. So this would be now visible to, if I save that, visible to, it's now going to be visible to David's parents, and indeed other people who are members of this student's household. So that's because it's household members. So if I delete that one, we will just see the new ones. So now if I go back to visible to, it's just visible to the parents of children who are in this household as part of the homestays profile. So that's the rule, which is community of households. The next one is team members of households, which is very similar, except it's based around team members rather than just community. So if I delete this one and team member of households, so team member of households, this is just based on community tags. And so I am looking for team members who are mothers and fathers. of students who are of David Wang. Now, you would use this to share a profile with somebody who isn't in this particular household. So here, I could be, say, for example, trying to show one or more profiles for homestays for households to a prospective set of parents. So I'm going to choose David's parents and make that visible too. I'm also going to add, let's say, Jacob Ling and add it to his parents as well. So that, in fact, sorry, Jacob was the father and Jenny was the student. So Jenny. So I'm going to make this visible to Jenny Ling's parents as well. If I now go to visible to, this is now visible to Jacob Ling, although he can't see it because he hasn't got permission to see it. But technically, this is available to David's parents and Jenny's parents. And finally, the final sharing rule is for household members. So this is where you have a file that you wish to make visible to members of the same household rather than the parents or the students of the household. So if I just go household members here, I can pick the household, so Pippa and John Radford. I can save that. So this file is now visible to all the members of the household. Now, obviously, Fiona and Martin, who are Pippa and John's children, can't see it. And in fact, John Radford is set up with a different set of permissions to his wife, Pippa. So he actually can't see this as well. And the reason for that is because John, his permission is just set to homestay, whereas Pippa is set to advanced homestay. Her permission is set as advanced homestay, and as advanced homestay, she has permission to see the resources tab here. So that's how the system works. If you have any questions or you'd like us to help you set up some of these rules or give you a demonstration for a specific set of circumstances, please give us a call.